All righty, it's 5 o'clock. We will go ahead and get study, or get,
Study.
We're gonna study.
Start studying.
Study.
Sir, I'm gonna study.
Tom, do you mind leading us a word?
I can do that. Pray with me, please. Most gracious God and Father, we come to you with humble hearts and say, thank you, God, for blessing us. Thank you for allowing us to live in this state, this country, and this city. We pray, Heavenly Father, that the hearts here and everyone we represent will search you, Lord. We pray, Heavenly Father, that the things we do and things we say will bring glory to you. In Christ's name I pray.
Amen.
Amen.
Michael is here.
Let's see if I can get them to quit texting each other and
Okay.
me.
All right, first item, consider authorizing abandonment of alley right-of-way. Ravon.
All right, everybody, what do you got for us?
So we're abandoning this alley, the yellow highlighted one, in exchange of this one, which will be dedicated by fact that this area can accommodate a car wash commercial business. Basically, that's what we are doing. Swapping this one with this one.
So Yvonne, are there utility lines in the existing alley?
We have a water line here,
Okay.
catches a fire hydrant, so they will reroute it around and catch this fire hydrant. There are some other couple of, I think it's AT&T and then for Atlas, yes, and they will relocate their lines to Kirkland, so it'll be free of everything, and they can have a building on top of the place.
Yvonne, from time to time, we abandon alleys or sell alleys. In this case, we're just
Swapping the alleys, yes, because they are very close in square footage, very close, I mean, within few feet.
Where is this?
This is University in
Yeah.
Troy, it's kind of close to West.
CBS out there by the blue.
Oh, okay, okay. I could not place where Troy.
It's a small one.
Okay, everybody good? Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Item 2, consider resolution for contracting the operation of the aquatic facility.
Steven.
Mr. Patton.
Hey, how are y'all?
Hey.
Sit down. See? On the floor. In your corner.
Floor is yours, Mr. Patton.
Thank you. I think we covered a few of these items on this particular agenda in the briefing session last time, but for a real fast recap, we were notified by the YMCA that they do not want to operate our pools anymore. We got official notice, and after I had some discussions with them, I think probably they were not meeting the goals financially that they needed to, and we're losing money on our contract. So they decided that they would not participate again, and we immediately put it out to bid. We solicited 5 different groups. We got 4 responses, and YMCA was one of those responses. $388,000 was their proposal. American Pool out of Georgia, Alpharetta, Georgia was $188,248. United Pool at $68,500, but labor costs in addition to that cost. That was only administrative costs. USA Management $223,780. With those 4 proposals that we received, those were proposals. We don't go for low bid. We go for the most qualified group based on our evaluation criteria. We had a subcommittee of the Park and Recreation Advisory Board member and staff reviewed all of those proposals. We made a recommendation to the Park and Recreation Advisory Board for USA to be the recommendation. The Park and Recreation Advisory Board had the packets of information, the proposals. They did their own evaluations, and they all recommended USA Management also. So we come forth with a recommendation of going with USA Management. And that will be on the consent agenda next time, primarily because I won't be here. I'm going to be in Galveston, and you're welcome to go. I'll be in Galveston at the Texas Recreation Park Society meeting, and I have a board meeting with the Texas Parks and Recreation Foundation, and I'm attending an ADA seminar.
Sounds like all work.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody good?
Yes.
Good.
And I'm sorry before we move on, Steve, what do you have budgeted? Cindy, what do you have budgeted for this?
212.
That's correct. We have
You
two
said
hundred and
there
twelve
was-
budgeted, and the 11,780 is gonna come out of our salary savings or the budget itself.
Okay, very good. Okay,
So no impact outside of our budget.
Right.
fantastic. Thanks, Steve.
Sure.
Item 3, consider approval.
There,
Yeah.
Mr. Plummer's.
Oh, yes, okay, we're gonna go ahead and move number 9 up because he has a plane to catch.
How are you? Good, good. Did you have a presentation?
I sent it to you a while back, I can shoot it to you again if you want.
Oh, that's, I think you can probably talk through it.
Be happy to.
And, ladies and gentlemen, this is Mr. Jim Plummer. Jim is with Riceville LLP. Some of you may remember Mr. Plummer, he was here previously, but I think on that particular date, he maybe had 3 council or 2 council. So I thought it was important to bring Mr. Plummer back and let him make a presentation on what's known as a public finance corporation. We'll talk a little bit about some opportunities that we might be able to establish to develop affordable housing, in particular in those areas that really haven't seen development before. So with that, Jim, I'm gonna hand it over to you.
Okay. A public facility corporation is a separate legal entity that the city has the opportunity to create. And essentially, it's a vehicle for a public-private partnership. We use them to do affordable housing. The statute requires that any housing done by a public facility corporation would need to have 50% of the units at 80% of median income. And so the Public Facility Corporation is a bit unique in that it is designed to produce workforce housing. It is not really designed to produce what you might think of as low-income housing. It is essentially trying to fill the gap in the financings that are out there. You have public housing, which routinely takes care of people who are usually in the 30 and 40% of median income range. You have tax credits, which take care of people whose income is usually 50 to 60% of median income. Your income's over 60% of median, but you're not making enough money to afford a standard market rate apartments project, and you're caught in the middle. And we see that on a very regular basis, particularly in communities like this where you've had a drastic rent increase. The cause of your rent increase is always somebody is getting paid a higher salary than what occurred before. And folks who are your local citizens essentially get squeezed out of housing on a pretty regular basis. And this is designed to provide housing that a retail worker can use, a person who is beginning in a municipal position, somebody working for the hospital district, a young teacher, for example. It's designed also to produce very high quality housing. What we essentially do is we do a market rate housing project, just like any other high-end, high-quality apartment project. But we're able to lower the rents to an affordable level because the property will be 100% property tax exempt. And that is what your being involved in the transaction brings to the transaction, is that the property would not be subject to tax as long as you own it. And you would own this property, but you would have a public-private partnership where you would turn around and enter into a long-term lease with the developer. And the developer would then actually go out and finance. I'm not gonna talk about crime.
No, he's got you up there now.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
But if you want to, you could.
No, I could not. The developer will have to finance the entire project, and will be the party that's liable for the debt on the project. The municipal entity doesn't issue any debt in this structure, it simply owns the project. I'm gonna run through, maybe,
Tom, can you tell him which button to push on?
up or down? Down.
Down.
Got it, okay. I'm gonna run through some of the reasons we use a public facility corporation. First, we do it for economic development in rate housing is not developing at a fast enough pace. Usually the lack of development is brought about because there's no comparable rent comps in order to support new Class A projects. I don't really think you have that problem here. I think you have plenty of market rate. But I want to show you how the tax exemption works in the transaction. If we had a piece of property that's 250 units and it's got a net operating income, that's nothing but income less expenses before debt service of $1 million, and it's also paying $700,000 of property taxes, then it can get a mortgage equal to $13,333,000. And we get there by virtue of taking the $1 million NOI, dividing it by a cap rate of 6%, and doing an 80% loan to value. If you take the taxes out of the equation, all of a sudden your NOI goes to $1.7 million. Now you have a $22 million mortgage in the project. And so it enables you to get more financing to do a project. As far as workforce housing, 50% of the units are reserved for individuals whose income is 80% or less than median income. If you go down here to Ector County, you'll see your adjusted median income is $73,900. 80% of that number is $59,120. If you charge rents at 30%, you could charge rents up to $1,478. And so under the program, you could charge up to that amount. I do not predict that somebody would be bringing you a project with rents at that high level, because I think that's probably pretty close to market rate level in a lot of places. And so what usually we see is them being below that 80% number. The other thing this does is it enhances your ability to do high quality housing. If you're going to do one of these projects, you want to do a Class A project. You don't want to do a run-of-the-mill project. If you're going to invest your property taxes in it, in effect, you want to deliver high quality housing.
A Class A property, for example, would be something like the developments that you see along Fodry, kind of a much higher end in terms of aesthetics and amenities. It's typically a Class A.
One of the things about entering into a public-private partnership is that you can control the terms. So they can't do the deal without you. So you can tell them what you want in the transaction. And that's extremely important to a lot of communities. You can have design requirements. You will clearly approve the plans and specs. You can approve the tenant selection criteria for the project. You can set the standard for the area that you're looking at.
Jim, would that extend to having some at least ability to direct where that development happens as well?
It usually developers bring projects and proposals to us. I think that if you had a concept of we want to do particularly redevelopment, and I see it downtown a lot, then you take the position that you're going to essentially maybe take less out of the deal if it's in a given area, and that will help drive developers to look in that area. One of the nice things about this structure is that you get 50% of the units at market rate.
50% of what?
At market rate. And therefore, that's the portion of the project that enables the partner to make a profit. And they have to maintain these projects. If they don't maintain the projects, the rents go down. And so there is a built-in incentive to have a long-term, high-quality product because of the market rates involved in the transaction. You may have experienced low-income or affordable housing that after 15 years is in pretty bad shape. And principally because they can't raise the rents. They have no economic incentive to maintain the project, to maintain the rents.
Those are typically going to be your tax credit type projects.
Yes, sir, they are. And in this case, they simply can't afford to do that because their value will decrease. The other thing is this is a long-term revenue source to you to help replace the taxes. You are giving up your taxes in these transactions. We usually have asked for a closing fee of $250,000 on the day of closing. We've also asked for a $250,000 fee at the 3-year mark when they stabilize the project. And then normally you will receive somewhere between 15 and 25% of the revenue from do the project, you're not gonna collect any taxes. You're not gonna collect the taxes associated with the increase in value, but you are gonna collect revenue. One of the things that none of us want to do is to harm our school districts. And so the first question that's gonna come up is, wait a minute, you're not paying school taxes. The answer to that is correct. But you're not harming the school district operations. School districts are paid on an amount per child per day. Generally about $7,000 a student a year. If the local property taxes generate greater than $7,000 per student per year, they make a payment to the state. The state gives that money to a poor school district. Part of what you hear of is Robin Hood. If you don't raise the funds that are equal to $7,000, the state pays you, and you still get $7,000. So from an operating perspective, whether a piece of property is on the rolls or not on the rolls, doesn't affect your school district operations. There are two aspects of operations that you need to at least explore. One is, if you locate a project that's a family project next to an overcrowded school, you just enhance the overcrowding. It's like traffic issues. So it's something we need to look at as we go forward with any project that will come up. The other thing is, if you place a project next to a school that is not overcrowded, you just increase their operating income. Because now you're bringing students to that school, and the school actually makes money off the transaction. School districts also have a debt tax. I think I have figured out that your school district's debt tax is about 10% of the tax. They will not collect the debt tax, and there is no offsetting value associated with that in a property tax exemption. So they do not contribute to the ability to pay bonds in the future of the project. They don't hurt outstanding bonds, because the outstanding bonds were financed without the project being in place, so it doesn't affect that. But it is true that they will not receive the bond portion of the tax. Now, that's a real issue. We can address that with revenues from the project and do what's called a pilot payment, so that the school district's not harmed in any way at the end of the day. And so there are ways to address tax issues that come up in one of these transactions. Now, have to be honest and tell you that the county does not receive the taxes. Sometimes cities don't care, sometimes they do, but that is a practical reality of a property tax exemption. And the property tax exemption here is a property tax exemption just like the building we're standing in. It's not something you grant, it's not something you have to deal with. By virtue of participating in the transaction with a public facility corporation, it is exempt under state law. It's not a discretionary exemption.
Before you leave that slide, I don't understand the second sentence up there. We usually receive a $250,000 closing fee, a $250,000 fee at the 3-year mark, and more revenue than the city would collect in taxes. Who is we?
It's the public facility corporation.
Okay, because you call it PFC,
Oh, I'm sorry.
and then I thought, are you telling us you do, or who is that? Okay.
I only represent government entities, so I
Okay.
apologize. It's
Yeah, I was just trying to understand the sentence. Okay.
It's a fair question.
Okay.
The financing, the $250,000, those are done out of the loan part of the capital cost of the project, and then the revenues are usually 15, 20, 25% of the revenues of the
Okay, that
project,
makes-
and
okay.
that's how it works out. I've got NIMBYism on here. I don't know whether NIMBYism is truly a problem or not, but this would be financed exactly the same as a market rate product. You don't have to do any special hearings. You don't have to hold any special meetings. And this is not a tax credit or a public this by virtue of the Public Facility Corporation owning the project and entering into a long-term leasehold with a partnership that builds the project. We've done it with a lot of housing, student housing, conference facilities, hotels, parking garages, parks, and downtown developments. You're authorized to own, acquire, construct, rehabilitate, renovate, repair, equip, furnish, replace, and service public facilities. And the Attorney General has determined that an apartment project, even one that is gated, is a public facility as long as it is offered to the public on a non-discriminatory basis. And so it is treated as a public facility. We use the Public Facility Corporation to shift risk away from the city. The city's not going to have any investment. They're not going to have any assets in it. They never could have liability for the debt because the debt is done by the partnership under the lease structure. And so the city should have no risk, and the Public Facility Corporation should have no risk in this transaction. And the lease on these transactions is a 75-year lease term. That is what is required to get the financing for the transaction. The banks have not let us have a transaction shorter than that. The projects are structured with the PFC entering into a partnership agreement with the equity party. There's a development agreement, a lease agreement. Private equity has to raise, the developer has to raise all the equity, obtain all the debts, provide all guarantees. All of the debt and financing side of the transaction is on their side, not on your side. The development agreement requires them to construct the project, and once it's constructed, it's deemed to be owned by the PFC and then operated by the development entity. We went through the expected returns. I'll address that if anybody has questions. While this is a separate legal entity, its board maybe is appointed by the city. So it could be the city council that actually sits as the board of this organization, or it could be anybody the city council chooses to put on the board. Meetings are open and available to the public and have to be properly noticed. Board members have the same immunity you have as sitting as a city council member. You normally conduct an annual board meeting, but otherwise it's on an as-needed basis. And we would normally ask 3 city council members to serve as the incorporators of the board. And that's simply signing the certificate of formation for the project. And there's no liability with regard to that. It just shows the city supports the project. The project is
Jim, I'm sorry, can you go back to that one?
Sure.
So we discussed this last time about a lot of what you see in PFCs is where the city council is actually the board. That way direction comes directly from the council.
Policies are set.
Policies set by the council.
Right.
And this is not, I'm trying to remember your presentation, but this would not be a good fit, for example, for a finance corporation, correct?
No, a finance corporation has a different property tax exemption, and you can't finance the private equity well through the finance corporation. It works for tax credits, but not for the structure. In, I think 2015, we went in and changed the legislation to enable us to do this structure. And so it's required virtually that you have a PFC for most equity raises. Sure.
And when you say this wouldn't work for a finance corporation, you're talking about like Jill's?
Yes,
Okay.
right. Jill has to stay in the transaction forever as the general partner. And the equity partners, market rate equity, do not necessarily want to have a governmental partner all the time. And so that's the real difference. City staff will serve as the staff of the corporation. We should talk about staffing, because one of the things that comes up is, okay, we're going to participate in an apartment project deal. How much staffing does that take? How do you do that? Do we have to have city employees out there every day? Do they manage the property? And the answer is no. Generally, a person, usually in a finance, it's always good if you have a construction person who can go out and look at the project on occasion during construction It's also always good to have a finance type person monitoring the project just to see what's going on with the project. Our experience in projects is that the on-site manager makes all the difference in the world. If you have a good one, you stay occupied. When you get a bad one, you can drop from a 95% occupancy to 85% in a heartbeat. And if you see that, you simply need to raise the question, what is going on? And it's usually pretty easy to fix.
And the manager is usually hired by the developer.
The manager is usually hired by the developer. If the managers are almost always a national management company, or if the developer has their own management company. And you can dictate the requirements for a manager. It is virtually all developer run. While it is all developer run, there are a couple of very important parts of a financing. You're gonna have a bank loan. That bank loan in virtually all these deals is over $20 million. And so you're gonna have a bank monitoring everything done with this project. They're gonna monitor every construction draw. If you have a HUD, an FHA bank loan, they physically will have outside consultants in place, and almost all bankers hire an outside construction company to monitor construction. You're also gonna have an equity partner different from the developer. And that equity partner is going to go through and monitor everything as well. And they are gonna be watching the books because quite frankly, that amounts to how much money they make. And so there are a lot of outside parties in these transactions. My typical finance phone call will have 20 people involved, because you will have everybody on the line trying to make sure their part of the deal is being done right. So they are pretty heavily monitored.
And the equity partner or partners is 20%?
It's usually 20%, a lot of times nowadays it's 30. It depends on who your lender is. If you do an FHA deal, you can do up to 85% loan to equity. If you do a typical commercial equity transaction, it'll be between 20 and 30%. That's what we're seeing today. This will be added to the city's annual audit as a constituent entity, so it does get reported, but that is the only tie to the city. Worst case scenarios. You may not make the projected profits if the deal doesn't work. It is a real estate deal at the end of the day. But you've got no investment in the property, and you have no liability with regard to the debt. The development entity and the equity of the parties that lose, it doesn't lose. However, if a project fails, the equity provider can come in, and the lender can come in and take over the project, and they have the ability to kick you out. But if they kick you out, they lose the tax exemption. So you got a piece of property that is in financial trouble, and if they kick you out, now they gotta pay taxes on top of that. And so they're even in deeper financial trouble. And so as a practical matter, we've never seen a project get in trouble, but we don't think it's likely that they would try to kick out the Public Facility Corporation. The biggest deal is you can't withdraw. This property is financed based upon property tax exemption. And the lenders will not let you out of the deal, and the equity will not let you out of the deal. So if a deal was done and it turned out that something bad happened, it could be a bad developer, it could be a gang come into the apartment project for a period of time, create bad publicity, you are part of that transaction. You cannot get out of it. Which basically means choose your developers very carefully. Make sure they have experience and that they're substantial. Because you can't just say, we've had enough, we're walking away. You will not be allowed to do that under the financing documents. The meetings are open to the public, the same as the city council. So theoretically, you could have a tenant come and complain, just like you could have a citizen come and complain. This is actually our structure. There's a landowner that will sell the land to the Public Facility Corporation. Public Facility Corporation will get the money to buy the land from an upfront lease payment. There's a 75-year leasehold interest with prepaid rent and all your other rents. There's a development entity. This party equity. That could be 90% in the beginning and 60% after the carried interest. And then you've got a development entity, which usually has to have 10% of the investment because they want them to have skin in the game. Then they go out and they get a first lien bank loan. The development entity has a development agreement with you. There's a construction contract, and we have the PFC serve as the general contractor. That eliminates sales tax on the materials that are in the property. And then there will be a sub-general contractor, which will be a construction company. And there is a management entity that's paid 3 or 4% of gross revenues in order to manage the property. And altogether, that is more like what the structure really looks like.
And the preferred return is their investment plus,
Usually 8 or 9%, sometimes 10%. To give you an idea of what it takes to raise capital in today's market, you have to have a preferred return between 8 and 10%. You actually have to have an internal rate of return of at least 20%, where they will not look at you. We routinely see deals with 25 to 30% internal rate of return to the equity investor if you're doing a third-party fund, New York type fund, doing the investment. If you have friends and family type money, then we often see anything from 15% to 20% in internal rate of return. That's the kind of return it takes to do an investment. And I don't know whether there will be a differentiation because you're in Odessa.
so the PFC, which would be us, until the preferred return goes back to the third-party equity owner and the development entity, there is no return to us, is that right?
That is correct.
And then after that point, it would be like 15% of the net
15 to 25, yes.
of the net, okay.
And that's why we get the $250,000 at closing, and then we try and get the $250,000 3 years later, is because you're not gonna see a revenue share until you pay the preferred return. And so that usually takes 4 or 5 years before you get there.
And when we talk about the preferred return, we're not talking about the debt monies, we're just talking about the equity monies.
Just the equity money, yes.
Okay.
What the company that I have talked to about coming here is a company called Lind. Lind was a large-scale management company that was an expert in turning around properties, and then got into the purchase and development of properties. Lind's program would be 25% of the net operating income after a 10% preferred return, 25% of all net sale proceeds after the return of capital, and an ongoing right to receive 25% of the purchaser's net operating income, and the purchaser's 25% of their increase in value for as long as the lease is outstanding. So their program is essentially you would own 25% of the project in perpetuity after preferred return. The numbers are fairly significant, and anything that would actually happen, the way these kind of things can evolve, if we're interested in moving forward, we would create a public facility corporation. That means city council has to pass a resolution that approves the certificate of formation of public facility corporation. We file that with the Secretary of State. Then we hold an initial meeting. The public facility corporation is just a hollow shell. Once you have a public facility corporation and developers know that you are willing to participate in this kind of program, then they would be interested in coming and looking for projects. They will come and try to tie up real estate. If they can't get a contract on real estate, they won't bring you anything because it's all hypothetical. So typically they've tied up real estate, put a pro forma together, put a project together, brought it to you for consideration. It is preliminary the first time they bring it to you. And so we do what we call an inducement resolution, which says, we're interested in participating. You're authorized to go negotiate a term sheet and come back to us with specifics. Put together the term sheet, then they go out and get their financing, we do the legal documents, The San Antonio Housing Trust has done probably 14 of these deals. In San Antonio, we couldn't do any affordable housing downtown because there's no land available now. You gotta build up, so you gotta do structured parking and you gotta go up. And that just doesn't work for affordable housing. We couldn't get it done. So we started ringing downtown. First available, reasonably priced piece of land. And now we have 6 or 8 of those around downtown. And they are luxury apartments. We are mandating that they do highest scale apartment projects. 50% are at 80%. And we are taking criticism because we are not financing at a low enough income level for the people who support affordable housing. And so the people who are trying to support really and truly providing low income housing are saying, you shouldn't be doing these, you should be doing low income housing. Make these deals instead of at 80%, make them 30%. Well, you can't get them financed at that level. And so, and we've not been able to convince our newspaper how that works. And so we've taken criticism.
Now, are you using affordable housing and workforce housing interchangeably?
I am.
Because we don't use it that way.
Right.
We use affordable as lower than workforce, but it sounds like you're talking about, you're using them
I
interchangeably.
do because HUD defines 80% as low income. And so if you're gonna follow the technical definitions under the federal programs, 80% is low income. I will tell you that in the city of San Antonio, the average rent probably hits 80%. But what really happens is in all housing, the lower your income, probably the older the house you're living in and the more dilapidated your house you're living in. While there are a lot of units in San Antonio that rent to individuals at 80%, you can't build a new unit and charge a rent that somebody at 80% can afford. And so for us, this is a way to expand housing. It's
50% of them are at that and the other 50% is market.
And what we do is we put a rent cap on it. We mandate that rents be set at 30% of 80%. And then that rent cap has to stay in place as long as you want the property tax exemption. And that tries to help us provide true affordability. The statute does not mandate family size adjustments, and so the lenders and the equity have refused to make family size adjustments. And so most of the projects that we finance end up with a rent somewhere in the neighborhood of $850 a month for a 1-bedroom, $1,000 to $1,200 a month for a 2-bed. And so, and that's what it takes to finance a new high-end apartment housing. And so, I mean, I don't wanna mislead anybody, I wanna make sure everybody feels like they're getting.
So the avenue for those at 30 or anywhere, say south of 50, those are gonna be the tax credit apartments.
Yeah, we're doing something really neat with tax credit apartments, and you can do if you set up this PFC, it can do tax credit deals if that's what you wish to do. And last November, the IRS came out with regulations on income averaging. And so what we're doing in San Antonio is if you wanna do a 4% tax credit deal, you gotta provide 10% of the units to individuals whose income is 30% plus. And so we are helping to reach the 30% through our tax credit projects.
And council, just to give you an idea, the median income for Odessa is $73,900. Someone at 80% with a family of 4 is gonna be at $59,100.
Those are the numbers you get.
Yeah.
Okay, other questions?
So, just thinking about if this is an avenue that the council wants to establish, the first order of business would be to develop an ordinance that the council will adopt, formulating the corporation.
Correct. I'll send you a copy of a resolution for council to adopt, and a certificate of formation, create the entity. There's no cost to the things that we'll need to do is sit down and have a workshop and say, okay, here's the developer's pro forma, here's what they've offered you. You know, this, what they offer you is always just minimum and it's straight and there's no bells and whistles. And so we'll need to sit down and have a conversation about, you know, what do you want? What are you trying to achieve? What kind of limitations do we want to go back with them? In San Antonio, we have taken the income that's up front and we have put it into a rental assistance bank, and we have bought down rents to enable us to reach lower income levels. Now, we're going to quit doing that because it's an inefficient way to buy down rents. You're buying down a rent in a luxury apartment, not necessarily a good investment. You're probably better off saving your money, and if you really want to support affordability, when you get a tax credit deal that can't quite make in your community, you put money into the tax credit deal, and then instead of having 10% at 60%, you have all of it at 60% or below. So now you get 250 units at 60% for the same exact dollar you could have delivered 30% in the other building. And so we're trying to make sure we're using our funds in an appropriate manner. I also have to tell you though that the funds in the Public Facility Corporation generally are used for public facilities. That could be sidewalks. That could be, we've used them for a parking lot to support additional parking in areas that need it because it's a public facility.
The
So-
profits you're talking
Yes, the
about?
profits can be
that we
used,
get.
or you can transfer them to the city and the city can use them for any city purpose. So they're not restricted to housing, should you have other needs that you want to use them for.
Jim, who deals with the general contractor? Who constructs this apartment?
It will be a name brand general contractor, I would hope. If
I can see us running away if we had to deal with the general.
You will not. You will not deal with a general contractor, I can assure you. To HUD financing, it'll be a bonded project, and that'll be one of the things we need to talk about. A bond cost about 1.5% of the construction contract cost, but it assures the project gets completed. So if you're a little afraid of your contractor, that might be something you want to mandate to happen. Most of these equity investors are only going to accept a known contractor. And so it's going to be one of the nationals, or it's going to be a developer acting as a contractor that the investor knows has done a bunch of projects and has faith in.
That the city doesn't have to oversee the construction and.
Other questions?
So Jim, around here, there's a lot of discussion about specialized populations.
Yes.
Teachers, first responders. Are there any restrictions via the PFC to make special provision for those types of individuals?
Not via the PFC. Fair housing is the only thing that drives that. And I will tell you is that your city manager is the only one that I know of who has actually gotten a fair housing determination that you can serve special populations. Because I was here 5 years ago with a company called NRP, and we tried to do a deal with the school district.
Yeah.
And we couldn't get the deal done because we were also working with the college system, and they just couldn't get it done. And our concept was that we were going to set aside units for teachers. What we were anticipating was the school district would say, I need 50 units of these sizes. And we would say, okay, school district, we want you to guarantee the rent for a period of time. And then if you don't rent them to your school teachers, then we'll release them out to the public. But if we get caught short, you said you wanted 50, we set 50 aside, you only filled up 48, and we can't re-rent them for a month, you need to pay us a month's rent on 2 units. And so that's how we were approaching that. But I think that's how a developer would want to approach it, but I think we could also really push to do something different. Particularly if we had a given need in the community. I think they would be more than willing to work with us on that kind of thing. I don't know exactly where you are in your lease up and your rentals with the slowdown in oil, but housing is pretty desperate here. I do know that, and so I think anything's gonna rent up pretty quick.
Last question I had, what is the, you may have said, but I missed it, is there a minimum number of units that make this work? I mean, does it need to be 200, 250?
As a practical matter, I only see 250 and above, and usually 300.
Okay.
So this would affect, I mean, if we did consider this, all of the taxing entities, correct? So theoretically, we would probably wanna make sure that PCISD, county,
Yes,
But it's
sir.
money they don't have now. I mean, if we cause this to be built, I mean, if we don't cause it to be built, they're not gonna have property taxes, and if we do cause it to build, they just wouldn't have any for this. I mean, it's not taking something away that they already have.
correct.
I will also tell you that we usually require the developers to go do that. The county generally won't say anything, but they're like, well, we want the taxes. And usually the answer is no, affordable housing is more important than you getting taxes that you're not otherwise gonna get, and quite frankly, you'll never have this project without it. School districts frankly have surprised us because if located in the proper place, the school district actually makes money off the project. And so we have mandated, you go talk to the school district. I mean, we don't want surprises, we wanna know. And it's all driven by location, and so we
Well, I
made
think
the
that's the
developers
most
do it.
attractive part about this to me, is that there's a real ability to somewhat direct where that happens, because we see apartment development, it's generally on our east side, which is needed. But there are areas of our, like our west side, central, and south, that haven't seen any appreciable apartment development that could really use that boost. And then, again, we're talking about Class A properties as well.
And I think the easy answer is you tell developers are always gonna go where every other apartment is going, where all the new amenities are, right? And I think the message to them needs to be, no, we have enough there. We're really interested in other areas of the city, in particular here and here. And we would consider, instead of a 25% sharing ratio, we would consider a 20% sharing ratio if you were located in one of these areas. And so that's usually the best way to drive that.
Other questions?
I have a couple of questions. Can you change criteria from development to development?
Yes.
So the criteria set for the PFC is not set in stone.
It is not. And quite frankly, it's very appropriate to do that because there's different costs associated with every project, and there's also different risk. And so we're doing a deal now that we're doing a rehab deal, and we're just basically the answer we got from our city council person was, if you could get them to bulldoze it, that'd be great. If you can get them to rehab it, that'd be great. I don't care if we make money, just get it to go away. And in that fact pattern, the developer brought us a deal, said, hey, I can't pay you what I've been paying you. And we were like, okay, do the deal. That needs to go away one way or another. And so the facts have to change. And quite frankly, if a developer brings you a deal out in an area that's already developed or overdeveloped, I think it's appropriate to say no. We say no to projects that we don't think achieve our goals on a pretty regular basis.
Are there PFCs in Texas that have failed?
I am not aware of a single PFC project failing. Now, that It's not a real long history. Started it in 15, took 2 years to get a project built, so our oldest project is 2017. And so, these have been done, Austin, Houston, San Antonio, Fort Worth. Dallas is working on it, but can't get out of its own bureaucratic way. We've done them in Cibolo, Bernie, we're working on one in Blanco, we're working on one in Fredericksburg, I assume we'll have one in New Braunfels very shortly. So they are expanding across the state, in part because it is extremely difficult to do a market rate project right now. I was told that HUD essentially cut off Midland, Odessa 6 months ago and said we're not doing any market rate units in Midland, Odessa. So if you don't have your app in, sorry, we're probably not interested. And I think that's pretty common around the state right now. It's hard to do a market rate deal, so we're seeing a lot of these.
Are there other things besides housing that these PFCs have been formed for?
Anything that can.
I saw they could, I just didn't know what they have.
Anything that can raise revenue, they work for.
Like a water project.
Yeah, a water project they could do. Anything that can pay the revenue, any public-private partnership candidate, you could probably use them for. We have used them for parking garages. We have used them to build other downtown facilities when we had a revenue source. The key is they gotta pay for themselves one way or another, so. You do all have my name and contact information on the back of that. If you have questions, you of course can funnel them through the city manager, or you can call me. I'm happy to try and address anything with regard to these things, and I think really the first step is create the entity, go fishing, see what you pull. And I will tell you, I have been trying to get a PFC project done here for 6 months. And most of my developers have said no. There's a heck of a lot less risk in the Austin market than there is coming to Odessa. And the equity essentially is a nationwide pool of money looking for the lowest risk with the highest return. And so I think it will definitely happen, but you do need to know that you're not going to be flooded just because of all the issues associated with developing here. Number one of which is the construction company getting a construction.
That's why I was asking those questions.
Okay. Any other questions?
One more on that now. I promise, no, it's my last one. This is the second time Mr. Plummer's been here. Is this something that the council would like to pursue? And if so, I can certainly work with Mr. Plummer to get an ordinance drafted and brought to the council.
I do want to cover one other thing, because nobody's asked the question. You should be asking the question, how do I get paid? Takes me
You
all
answered
day.
that one the last time.
I did.
I was there.
But not everybody was there.
I was there.
It takes me all day to get here and back, and so, but I do get paid by the project. If there is no project, I don't get paid. And so, I try not to ask government entities to pay our fees. Frankly, I work for a national law firm and my fees are absurd, and so, we let the projects handle our fees, and that's how we get paid. But we will only represent you in the transaction.
So a percentage of the project, is that what
I charge $200,000 to close one of these deals. Yep.
All righty. Thank you very much.
Thank y'all.
sir.
And catch your plane.
I will.
All righty. We will move
Thank you
to
very much.
Thank y'all.
item 3, consider approval of PSA with LCA for the roadway design of Dalton.
I'm sorry I don't have as many numbers as the last presentation.
Michael had asked if we
Yeah.
wanted,
What do you have to lose?
I kind of
Give
feel
it there
that
in
way.
case it ever comes.
I was kinda surprised though at the very, he said I'd throw it out there and fish, and then he said, but I've been trying to fish in this pond for 6 months and nobody's interested. But if it were set up, there could be.
Well, theoretically, it's easy to say, I wouldn't do it, but if there's money on the table, that's harder to walk away from.
You know, and HUD will come back into town, so my question is, why wouldn't you just have it set up and put it on the back burner and go from there?
I think
You're
it's-
chewing on your lip. What do you
I
think?
don't know.
There's no
If we don't
downside.
have anything to
Huh?
lose, you know, if there's no
There's no
money
downside
involved
to
from the
it.
beginning.
Doesn't cost us
That's
anything.
It cost us nothing, and then he said we could back out if it's not something we want.
Well, we don't have to accept any project. I
Right.
mean, they could bring as many.
There's no
but
downside.
Or we could just say no.
I think it's an attempt to continue to find some creative ways for housing.
You know, the school board would be all over this if you could say we could give you 50 apartments for teachers. Because why do they leave?
I know.
Can't get a cost of living.
And I think it's
Well,
really
look at our
important 'cause
firemen and policemen. How many
Exactly.
of those have left
I think
because
it's
of
something we
housing?
need to look at, cause we have been saying we're gonna do housing since we
Just
got
find
here.
it.
And we're not this is just another way
But
to
I
look
think
at
you
it.
create all the options you can,
Ex-
this would be an
absolutely.
option,
Right.
Absolutely.
so.
Okay.
I think I worry about those other taxing entities.
Well, hospital district needs it. OC needs teachers. You know, you can,
I mean, you're helping in a different way. I don't know.
okay. We'll have him, when he gets back in here, I'll tell him. Hal, it's yours.
Okay.
As part of the
Are
2019.
you through?
You're still here?
Philip said I could have 30 seconds.
Oh.
There's money into it.
As part of
Ah.
the 2019 certificates of obligations, 4 roadways were identified for roadway design. And so this agenda item before you tonight is the professional services agreement with LCA for Dawn Avenue. And that's gonna be between, Yukon Road and 87th. We're looking at a 5-lane roadway there. The cost of this design work is $307,110. It also includes design work for that linear park on the east side of Dawn. The consultant's gonna work directly with Steve Patton to make him happy. And the schedule for this design is March of 21. And that's what this is an item is.
Michael, can we use ODC money?
That's, yes, sir.
Okay, any questions?
So it takes a year to design it?
It's a land grab. Item 4, consider appropriating funds for the payment to Encore.
As part of the ongoing University Boulevard Improvement Project, at the intersection of Maple, there's a huge overhead Encore transmission line. Used to be transmission and distribution overhead. What happened was, because of the roadway widening, we had to relocate those poles. And so with all the work Encore did, distribution went underground, and transmission is still up overhead on those 2 bigger poles to get the wires higher. It's the Encore work is not part of the roadway construction project. It was separate. And what we're asking for is to pay Encore out of the 2013 debt issuance. The cost for that we're being billed from Encore is half the bill. They're only charging us half the cost. That half is $268,027. And so that's what this agenda item is for asking to use the interest earnings out of the 2013 certificates of obligations.
So these are interest earnings on monies that we haven't spent yet?
Yeah, so typically, we wait towards more the end of the bond issue and look at appropriating the amount of interest that's been earned on those funds. And they have to be spent on the same type of projects that your bond issue allows you to spend them on. So, I think 9/30/19, where we're at 1.5 million, maybe a little more, so we have some interest earnings, but they've never been appropriated, so in order to pay for this out of that, we need to appropriate those funds. And then we
that
can
still
come back
leaves us
and,
$1,200,000,
yeah,
more or
we'll
less.
still have some,
It's still learning.
it's still,
Great. Everybody good?
There may be another similar item that wasn't part of the project, but would be necessary to finish out the project that we may come back to.
Okay.
And are they paying the other half?
Yes.
Okay, so we're just splitting
Already
it.
for the change.
Exactly, write the check.
Write that check.
Thank you, Hal.
Okay.
Randy, talk to us about annexation.
Yes, sir. This is annexation and original zoning request upon Audrey. Is that 3 acres?
You may get phone calls on this.
I have taken some steps already to kind of alleviate phone calls to you guys. The original request was for a retail one zone. I have had discussions with the applicant, and we're gonna go for planned development retail one to assure buffering and minimizing elements be included in this development. They are open to this and they've agreed to it. So I think it'll all go through fairly easy, and the homeowners around there in Ponderosa, I think they'll feel better with the PD knowing that there will be buffering elements involved in this development.
Is that
What
the
would
difference? Is that the difference between the two?
Yes, ma'am. The PD actually guarantees that they will be put in because they have to go through a site plan approval. We put conditions on it. They have to meet those conditions in order to have a building permit issued.
Randy, what sort of, give us an example of what those conditions might be.
Condition will be a minimum 7-foot tall decorative masonry screening fence in addition to what the homeowners already have back there. This will be in addition to it. We're requiring that a portion of the landscaping be added in the back, so there will be a buffering landscape. The activities for the store will not be in the back. They're like loading bay will be on the side, so there's not any trucks coming back interfering with the houses that are in the back. So we'll put those elements like that. And we've already discussed, like I say, discussed that with the applicants, and they're open to doing that.
Where is it?
Oh, it's on Audrey, north of 191, just about where the entrance is to Wiley Brown's subdivision out there.
Right there by that Shiloh estate.
I know, I can see you going, Shiloh Estates.
I'm almost there.
Yeah. Yeah. You're driving, making the left turn.
Turn signal.
Yeah. Yeah, one of these cars go to, and then I saw her reach over and change the radio station. So.
Okay, any questions?
And what is the business gonna be?
It's gonna be
Dollar General?
one of these discount dollar stores, I think it's Dollar General.
Right there at the entrance to Shiloh Estate?
Well, it's gonna be a little bit,
Okay, there's one more.
yeah, there's gonna be one extra vacant lot, but there's also gonna be a strip center. It's another 3 acres just south of this. So it's gonna be a strip of retail in through there.
So is it the strip west or east of Audrey between 191 and Shiloh Estates?
West.
West. It's west of,
So it's
It's
closer
right
to
across from that entrance.
yeah,
To there, you just look right across.
yeah,
You
it's
see
on,
some land right there.
yeah, it's on the west side of Audrey Road.
So it's
Yep.
south of 56th Street.
Yes, or north of 56.
North of 56.
North of
I'm
56.
already there, I see.
It's in between 56th and where Yukon curves to the south.
We can pull that up on the map, council, if you.
So, and this is, we've sent out to all the homeowners around that area?
We sent out to who we're required to send out
No,
to.
but who is that?
The people within inside the city, but last, council meeting, I had, well, the mayor and I both
Yeah,
had.
I was cornered. You were the one that came over.
Yeah. Fairly extensive meeting with, Ponderosa homeowners out here.
Oh, I saw y'all talking.
So, they were already well aware of it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Are they opposed?
They felt much better after talking with us, and shoot, we were
Because you
there.
sound like a politician, were they, I mean.
At first, they were very much opposed. And then when you started telling them it's better that they come into the city where we have some regulation and control over it, than them just going in there without it being in the city.
Cause they can do that.
They could do anything they wanted to then.
Yeah.
And they said, you know, you've got a point there.
All right, where's it at?
You want to show me?
Right there to the left, right there.
Right there. Blow that up, good.
Isn't there a storage unit just up right above that blue line right there?
Right up in through here, there's, something like that that's outside the city that we had no control over. And then there's also a,
Chicken?
well, there's a, stone.
There's a big chicken.
Great chicken.
You're right,
Yeah,
that
It's
big
big, there's a big
blue roof.
metal chicken out there.
Yeah.
And then there's that.
It's like this,
hard.
right there on the left.
Yeah, and then that stone processing company that's out there
Yes,
too.
yes, yes.
It's
There's a
outside the
lot of
city.
commercial that's been developed up there.
Yeah.
Now,
So-
the entrance to, what is it further back? I mean, the entrance to Mission,
It's the.
Yeah.
way back
It's
here.
It's some of
Yeah,
this-
Shiloh is right here, and this will be up in this area. Here's the gal, it's right here in this area is where this is gonna be, and then this area here will be another, strip center right there. We'll have, site plan approval control over that one, we already have that, so when that comes in, they'll have to do the same thing, buffering walls, landscaping, things of this.
So Randy, what, it kind of roughly, what is the outline for what we're looking at annexing?
Right now?
Family Dollar.
Right there,
Okay.
that 3-acre tract square right there, or rectangle.
Okay, any other questions?
Right next to the horses, right?
Yes.
Okay, next one, we're approval of the amendment to the city code.
Yes, sir. What this one will do, it's actually just a amendment to the city code. We're gonna establish that there will be be able to have a food court in downtown. And I say a food court, it'd be like where we have food trucks be able to come in. And it's gonna amend the food truck ordinance, because right now, they can only stay in one place for a 24-hour period. This amendment will let them go downtown and stay longer than 24 hours as long as it's a city-sponsored event, or if it is in an approved food truck park. So that will allow longer than a 24-hour stay.
Longer than, but did you say how long?
It'll be part of the approval process, you know, to determine how long it'll be.
So
But
that
that's-
only applies to downtown, Randy?
Excuse me?
Only applies to downtown?
Only applies to downtown.
And that's gonna be the area from, what, 8th to 2nd, Lee to Jackson?
Yes. Actually, it applies to the overlay zone is where it is.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Yeah, the
So that's,
overlay zone.
that's 10th to 2nd,
Yeah.
10th to 1st, Dotsey and Adams.
Adams.
Oh, so it is further, okay.
Yeah, a little bit further, but it just applies to the overlay zone.
Okay.
Okay.
I didn't know what that
Item 7,
And then 7 is basically, about a year ago, the council approved a bunch of amendments to the zoning ordinance. This was finding the mistakes and correcting that we had to those amendments.
You mean we had a problem?
Oh, a lot of it was just coordinating where some of the numbers in
Typographical errors?
yeah, some of the chapters, instead of having chapter 14.7.8, it was 14.8.7, so we'd have to correct that.
See, typos
And it's
is one thing.
typos. That's what this is, correcting all the typos that were in there.
Okay. Any questions for Andy?
Is it still pretty good ordinance?
Yes, sir. In fact, it's been plagiarized several times.
Without
Yeah.
Put it out the spellings.
Without the,
Copy correct?
yeah, yeah.
Alrighty. Item 8, consider adoption.
Thanks,
That's
Mr.
still-
President.
Thank you.
Hey, Randy.
Thanks, Randall.
Darryl?
Thanks. How are you doing?
Hello, hello.
How are you? I'm doing good, Mr. Dan.
See you later, Randy.
Y'all tag team anymore? Is that what y'all do? That's what we do.
Tell me you got 1 minute.
Y'all doing okay tonight?
Good.
So hopefully by now y'all have taken a look at this personnel policy, 6.105. We started this, I guess, in June of last year.
Actually started this before you got here
Okay.
in the early days of Gary Landers.
Early days of Gary Landers. He'll fill you in on all the history and everything, and probably tell you a few things along the way.
Go ahead.
As we go. So anyway, what we want to do though, nothing has ever been in writing, to my knowledge. There was a resolution a few years ago with Joel Roberts when he was city attorney.
There has been a resolution of the city council that was used 2 or 3 times in the last 25 years that I'm aware of.
Okay. But nothing as far as policies or anything like that in writing, promising to take care of the city council, mayor, if you get sued, promising to take care of your everyday law enforcement officer if they were to get sued. So that's something that we're proposing to do, is we would like to have this approved, 6.105, and it basically promises, it's basically a guarantee that the city of Odessa will have your back, that we will protect you, that we will do what's right. And of course, you can't go out and break the law or anything like that, but nothing criminal. But that's essentially what we're saying here.
And Dan, this is essentially codifying something we already do.
It's basically putting in writing what we already do. It's codifying it, right? Because we are already doing it, but what we want to do though is we want to put it in writing so that it's like this morning at the meeting this morning, Chief Gerke spoke up and said, you know, for the everyday law enforcement officer, this is something that they would appreciate, knowing that we're going to protect them because we've got their back.
Just about every public entity, whether it's a city, a county, a school district, state governments, and the feds,
They do this.
have some mechanism by which they can defend their employees, starting with their elected officials, including the city council and city management, right on down to the lowest rank and file employee, including police officers who tend to be concerned about it. If you're in municipal government or any kind of government, you're essentially in a situation where you have to do things that sometimes irritate folks, and sometimes the irritation is ample enough for them to want to file a lawsuit against you personally. It's just the nature of the beast. Our job is to try to keep you from getting in trouble. But if you do get in trouble, it makes life a lot easier if we don't have to sit down at that point and start discussing about whether or not we owe you defense. We'd like to have that all saucered and blowed before that happens. And that's what this is.
Well, maybe I'm just not reading this right, because it looks like in paragraph 3B that it's the city's discretion whether or not they're gonna provide the defense.
Well, that is.
Am I reading this wrong?
That is correct, but one of the things that we want to do though is we don't want to be in a position where someone goes out and commits some crime and we find out about it later on after the fact, and then we're stuck representing them. We want to be able to get out of it when necessary.
Well,
So this is a defense in the scope of.
Of employment only.
Of employment
Yeah.
only, during
Yes.
the
During the
actual
course and scope of
execution of one's
Right.
job.
the phrase of art, Peggy, would be anything that's done in the course and scope of employment. And for elected officials like yourselves, that includes basically anything you do. Even a small not-for-profit organization, we've reached the point we're so litigious in our society that I don't know anybody that'll even serve as a director on a local charity anymore without knowing that charity has directors and officers liability. We have public officials liability insurance. I buy it for you guys.
Right. I remember
Just
that.
like we get directors and officers liability for the ODC. Okay. But we're talking about people who are not directors and officers, who are not public officials. You're included in this. And
I understand that. I guess I'm just saying that that this is not saying that we will provide this defense to employees if this happens within the scope of their employment. It says that we have the right to decide if we're going to.
Well, I think,
Am I-
I haven't read the latest version, but
Am
I
I
think the intent.
wrong?
The intent is that any actions taken in the course and scope of employment which result in a claim or suit brought against that employee the city will provide defense. That is the intent.
Dan,
And
deal
if
with
there's
this
any
provision.
ambiguity about that, we need to change it.
Yeah, we can look at that.
Okay, and I may just be reading it wrong, but it looks like it's
It
still an
probably needs to be a
optional
little bit
thing.
clearer.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay.
We can do that.
And as
You
Dan
see
said,
what I'm looking
that's,
at?
what we're talking about is torts. We're talking about
Yeah.
civil liability. We're not, there have been some regrettable incidents in the last few years right here in Texas where they usually involve law enforcement, but not always, where there have been some employees charged with murder. This does not step up to that.
No.
Those people are getting defense, but it's usually through their union situation.
The way I read this is that you may provide defense under this policy through internal resources or retain outside counsel chosen by management of the city's legal department.
Well, and that's because frequently in a situation like this, you have a conflict.
Oh, sure. No, I understand that.
But what you're
That-
saying is that the option is whether you do it internally or
Right,
externally.
right. They have the, right,
And I
right.
read that, but I couldn't see where it said, but it will happen.
Oh,
If there's an
Anyway, just-
ambiguity, if
We-
there's an
we'll
ambiguity,
clear
then
that.
Okay.
Dan will look it up.
eliminate it.
Yeah,
Back in
we'll-
74, I think, I got here in 95. In 94, there was a case that involved some allegations and lawsuits brought by an employee against the mayor, who was at the time was Ms. Perryman. The suit was brought against the city manager, Jerry McGuire, brought against the chief of police, James Jenkins, and several other people. The decision was made that because of the nature of the allegations, that each of the defendants needed their own counsel. So we had, for a period of about 2 or 3 years, we had 5 different law firms on retainer. Ultimately, this was in federal district court, so we did not have the Texas Tort Claims Act or any of that available to us. Ultimately, we prevailed. The legal fees were $474,000. I know that because I'm the one that wrote the check, or checks. So, that's, and we provided defense to everybody that got sued, and we should have. It was appropriate for us to do that.
Okay. Any more questions?
good job.
Thank y'all very much.
Thank you, sirs.
Thank y'all. See y'all later. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Okay, number 10, Miss Muncy.
We put this last item on here. I had sent an email out last Friday. I brought a copy of it in case y'all needed refresher on that. Mr. Sprouls had asked about what would happen if we did revenue bonds instead of COs for the issuance. And so Mr. Wilford, our financial advisor, prepared a couple of schedules to reflect that. And that was included in this email. And also, I wanted to kind of remind y'all back to a presentation that was done, and just to remind y'all about the different debt issuances. So if you do the only issuance that you do that takes voter approval is a general obligation bond, because it's affecting the taxpayers, okay? So a revenue bond is just affecting the users of the utility by the way of the rate increases, okay? So there's no vote there of the public, okay, on a revenue bond. Same thing with the COs, there's no vote of the public. So the only one that's a vote of the public is general obligation bonds. We would not be issuing general obligation bonds for a water sewer project. Typically, that's not done. The difference with the CO issue is you can do a CO issue for either taxes or revenues that's generated from a system like the water sewer system. It does have a backing of the tax dollars, meaning if something happens and you're not able to raise enough funds there, that you could go back to that. But the likelihood of that ever happening is very slim, because you can always do your rate increases to adjust for anything that you need to do with your debt. Okay? So in the schedules that he showed you, because of there's more restrictions with the revenue bonds, and that's because they don't have this substitute backing of the tax if something fails in not having enough water sewer revenues to pay the debt.
It's
Okay.
strictly backed by the revenues that are generated.
And when you issue the COs, you strictly say that they're gonna be self-supported by the water sewer fund, that we don't intend to ever use tax dollars to pay those, okay? So, as you can see by the schedules and by what I'd put in the cover email and George had, is that it's gonna cost you, 1 to 1.2 million, depending on where the interest rate falls, extra to do the revenue bonds, okay? It costs you about 30 basis points higher on a revenue bond versus a CO issue. And then you have to do the debt service reserve fund. Okay, because of revenue bonds, you have to reserve your debt service. And one of the things that we do is that we look at our net earnings available for debt service. And George was estimating that needed to be about 30 million. For fiscal year 18, I don't have the 19 CAFR completed yet. For the fiscal year 18, we were at almost 26 million. So we were close to that, but we weren't quite there yet. It's just requiring more restrictions on us. So I was making sure I answered your questions and was giving you examples of what that would do.
So is that the same monies that we call the 90 days reserve? What does that mean when you say we have to have?
No, it's a debt service reserve. So you have to put into a debt service fund, a reserve, equal to 1 year's payments on the bonds. Okay? And so basically that's what he was showing you, is that it adds kind of an extra year to your bonds. And you can use that in the last year to make your payment, okay?
But you gotta have it up
But you have to
front.
have it up front to give assurance that you're gonna make those payments.
And in our instance, we don't have that kind of money set back for this at all, do we?
No, and you would do it through your payment amount. That's why your annual debt service payment amount goes up, is because you're gonna set that aside,
Okay.
okay?
This was great information. Thank you.
Yeah, it is.
Well, I mean, it's good questions. I mean, it's all things that you should know about, the different types of debt issuances.
Explain the difference between Schedule 1 and Schedule 2. They're not real well tied.
Okay, so Schedule 1, if you'll notice in the gray area, Tom, it's telling you that that's at 3.8%.
No, okay.
So if he was showing you, if you did a CO at 3.5, then 30 basis points higher would be the 3.8. And then Schedule 2 is if we assume a rate at 4% on the COs, which is where we started at. And all our schedules have just showed y'all at 4%. Then for a revenue bond, it would be 4.3. So that's the difference between those two. And now, granted, this doesn't take into consideration, what we were projecting as far as, funds that are now available. This is just showing you the actual debt payments, okay?
Questions?
Well, hold on a second.
Sure.
This isn't confusing at all, right?
No, no. So we would be, yeah, now that's for, it was, yeah, water. Now sewer was 7 years ago, 8 years ago.
So, and this is, I still wanna be sure in my mind, but this is really only $100 million of new money. Because we're refinancing our existing debt, right?
No.
No. I
Okay,
didn't think
how
so.
am I?
It's all new
New
money.
money.
Yeah.
The whole 195 million is new
Well,
money.
that's what
But
okay.
the debt This is- service is coming from, including the 65 million from Pioneer.
Yes.
That's what you're,
Yeah,
I
so-
think that's where you're.
Where I, yeah,
Okay, so when we were presenting the projects to you,
right.
okay, so we have 195 million that we're gonna do the debt issuance on. We still have the annual maintenance that needs to be done every year, which is 6 million a year, okay?
Right.
We also still have 7 years of $6.5 million of owed debt payments to make. So it's not fair to really break it out and say that we're not taking care of our old taxpayer, our current taxpayers, or ratepayers, not taxpayers, ratepayers, because we're gonna use the Pioneer money to pay that old debt, which they're currently supporting. We're gonna use that Pioneer money to support the 6 million rehab. So I think we have to consider that when we're looking at the total project. That's how we got the 65% and the 35%, okay? Okay. So does that make sense to
Yeah,
everybody?
it does. I was just looking at this last
Well,
page
you start
that
looking-
said
yeah.
95 million existing and 100 million expansion. That's not talking about the debt, that's talking about the monies to pay the debt.
I think that's referring to
The project type.
95 million is the rehab work. And
Is the
100
plan.
million is
For existing
And the-
infrastructure,
Yes,
not
the
existing
100 million
debt.
is line P, line Q,
think I asked
the
this
towers,
question
the
before.
24-inch
That's a different
line.
term than we've used.
Right, that's what I was saying. I think I've
Yeah.
asked that very same question before.
We hadn't made this real clear cut anywhere.
That would be a water tower out north of town, along with all of that? Is that part of that?
Yes.
That's the 100 million?
Yes.
Mhm. And elevated.
Yeah, maybe you need enough water pressure up
Yeah,
there.
okay.
Yep.
So that
Okay,
would
I
be
got you.
PQ,
The
the
tower.
distribution,
the line.
rehab.
No, it's PQ.
All the news.
Here,
I've got it.
PQ, the northeast water system, and the
Right here.
southwest.
The southeast, yeah.
southwest,
Southwest,
and new
north.
development.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
That we're not gonna go look at tomorrow, right?
It's gonna be kinda nasty tomorrow. We're just
I ain't
not
going.
picking the right day for these tours.
I can have them open the gate for you.
However, the council wants to, we'll be there.
The
Well, no,
95
tomorrow
Looking
there's
at
so many
things,
things
right?
happening, I just thought,
I'm
thank you.
The 95 includes the work we're doing with the sewer
And then I
line,
have Motran too.
where they're trying to get across I-20.
That's cute.
Yeah, I'm with you.
That's cute.
That's a water line. There's a sewer project that we were introduced to too.
But the Q is the one that's overflowing.
So Tom, the new wastewater lines on the east side, that's P and Q, P first, right?
Yes, sir.
Would you just real quickly walk us through that?
Okay.
Should we call it
P will come from the wastewater plant up.
So it's P.
Go ahead, Tom.
Okay. P will come up from the wastewater plant up to Faudrey and Business 20. We have a major lift station there that's about to exceed capacity.
Is that what, Faudrey and what?
Faudrey and Business 20?
So that's all included.
What did it say?
You know
What does it
exactly.
say?
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, I know you know where that pump is.
We're gonna have to explain all this. We need to know.
And so
what-
that line at the plant's about a 54-inch size, it's 48-inch once we get up there. I mean, and it's a pretty good stretch, and it'll be deep in some locations, 20 feet plus. And so anyway, that will take out that lift station, and advances our capacity so that we can handle new development inside the city limits also, because the station's just getting maxed out. Then line Q will go from that location, head up the east area, down on the other side of Bankhead, on up to crossing 191 around Yukon, and then heading up further up north onto into Parks Bell area. And that line will allow the development of that east watershed to be able to drain down into the and all that land. About those lines will serve altogether 19,000 acres, of which 14,000 is undeveloped at this time. So adds a lot of property to be able to be expanded.
Scary part is
Hurt
getting
property.
capacity.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, it is.
As we go
We're
through the
watching.
process, will we have opportunity to explain to the
So
public?
that is a great question, because it is a debt issuance, it is a bond, so there are some limitations on what we can
Right.
say
But we
and
can
or
give
do.
facts.
We can only give
Give
facts, yes ma'am.
facts.
So if this is the route, we're gonna proceed in this route unless the council tells us otherwise.
Right.
And we will develop information much like we did for the last one.
Good.
I think we need still better ways to do it too, because if you don't come to city council, you didn't get it. I still think we need to do
Well, we
some
put it
kind of
on our
live thing.
website like last time. The problem with holding town hall meetings is you get involved in a question and answer. And that's what causes you to give an opinion. And that's what you're not allowed to do.
But I don't even think it has to be a town hall meeting, but I think it could be something live that is filmed that has the facts that we're talking, because people don't like to go to town hall meetings anymore. They don't get out, but they
No,
will
no,
watch
we've
it.
had several.
They'll watch it
Yeah.
from
So
home.
you're talking about a Q&A type deal that is pre-filmed, that go watch the video.
Right.
Or can you do Facebook Live?
Well,
Have one of those.
however you do it, but I know we want it where they go on our web, they can find it, to hear about it, and we can refer to it.
So-
Like all the details of
So what we
this are.
did last time, we did small snippet videos, did we not, Philip?
No, so we
No,
not.
We wanted to, and they're afraid they
we
was too much.
Yes, we
Because I was
posted it on our
those little
website as a
snippets
fact
and-
sheet. It was the first thing you saw when you opened up our website, so.
But
But
if
I-
we also have those fact sheets to put out downstairs, could we?
Yeah, we can post it on
Have
the
something-
bulletin board downstairs.
Yeah, and,
Yeah.
you know, that, just those fact sheets that we could distribute.
But I really think a predetermined Q&A that is filmed and there's no violations of anything, because there's just something different when you hand somebody a piece of paper and say, read this, or when you have somebody talking about it and saying, this is what it's gonna be used for, and it's this air, and it's just, because the last thing we wanna do is come across as if we're trying to slide this by them, which is what
And we've had
happens.
some questions on that, and that was my concern, is that, you know, if they know what we're doing, there's more buy-in from the people that I've talked to, once you've explained why, and given some this, and that, just some facts that we had here, you know, then they are more apt to say,
They
whether
realize-
they trust us
Yeah.
or not,
They realize the sewers
realize
at
what's
capacity.
going on, yeah, and that it's for the good of the city.
Yeah.
And just to remember, this is all gonna be covered by rate payers. It's not taxes, it's not gonna come in, we're not
Well,
raising.
and when you tell, you know, when you mention
That's
that, they say that is still an
That's
increase,
just
it may not
tax,
be
yeah,
here, but it's here.
It's
That's
not
true,
taxes, but
that's true.
it's still out of my
But
pocket.
really, at the end of the day, we're not gonna be able to escape rate increases. Whether we do this or we don't do this, we're not gonna be able to afford.
Yeah, if you don't do this, then, you know, we're gonna have to do something internally to raise enough money to take care of the dire conditions that we
Yeah,
have,
And
so.
in that Q&A, I think it's important to show when the last rate increase was, you know, that.
Didn't we understand, I mean, if we don't do Q&A, construction stops,
Right.
correct?
If we don't do,
If we
yeah.
don't do the CO.
Well, and if we don't address,
P and Q. I thought you said Q and A.
He did.
Okay.
He did, but we just.
If we don't let you ask
knew what he was
questions, we're
saying.
stopping you. We're not gonna do anything if you can't answer it.
We knew.
it seems seems like every time you turn on the news today, you see examples where cities have failed to maintain their infrastructure, and you get
I
these
sent you that
catastrophic-
article.
Oh my gosh,
These
Tom.
catastrophic events like Fort Lauderdale.
Fort Lauderdale, they had
If,
sewage
but we have.
Oh, no.
running down their streets.
Oh, we had it in San Angelo several times in the river too, because of infrastructure.
And
The old days of
interestingly enough,
Tombstone.
today in this Opportunity Odessa meeting, the people that were in that room, they prioritized the concerns on our community, and infrastructure was number one.
And it should be.
I thought,
should
well,
be.
if that's really true, then people are gonna be happy about this, that we're dealing with it. If that is if that concern is on a lot of people's hearts, then this will be good. I realize not everybody's laying in bed worrying about the
Yeah.
water lines.
Okay,
but-
is there any other information or concerns we need to address for anybody?
I think the meetup is fine. I still wish there was a way of hitting everybody.
Why don't we work on fact sheets and maybe we can have them at briefing next week?
Maybe y'all could have them in the morning?
No.
Since we're not going to the plant.
Well, I think
well,
when
try
I think when this goes out to the public, I mean, I think we ought to have that thing on our website for further the Q&A pieces. I really do.
Well, it may go out to the public sooner than we think, so.
Well,
But I'm
you know, it's
talking
good
about-
information, but yeah.
And
I'm
that's
talking
exactly
about
right. I mean,
council.
every session is posted, our agenda's posted on every session, and the news media is invited to every posted
No,
session, so
right.
I mean, we.
I just want to be sure that we have all the answers so people have access to them. Because there's really not an option to do this. There is no choice.
Well, and again, I think that's the line that all of us, when we're answering questions, that we have to be cognizant of, that we cannot give an opinion, but rather just the facts as we see them.
And the two guys that I talked to once, that was, they understood. They just wanted to know.
Right.
We will develop a fact sheet, we will get with Devin, and we'll explore some options, Peggy, that will allow us to get that information out there.
I guess my question is if you could do a video, Michael, like you're saying, with just you there, instead of having to read it, is that here's the facts, here's the question, here's the answer, and where it can be seen that way.
But where would you show it?
On the
But just show it on that, and then you could have then in those things,
Yeah.
the organizations that you have, let them show it at the Kiwanis Club, let them
Yeah.
show it at Lions
Can't
Club.
show it like at the plant, you
Yeah.
can't, because then you're encouraging an opinion about the condition of the plant. So that's the things that we have to see. And we have to make sure that we run it through
Stay
our
covered.
bond council before we
Yeah.
release anything out, because we have to follow all the laws and regulations of
Right.
issuing the CO issue.
If you get-
And they're pretty stringent, I mean, they're
Yeah.
strict.
Yeah.
but
They're
if it's,
protecting us, so.
Yeah.
but there's no reason that we still shouldn't be able to have a person or a couple of counselors, somebody, if saying what we're allowed to say, so people are hearing it as if somebody's telling them instead of, I mean, I think.
Just keep check it first.
Let's see if Devin can come up with something.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like I said, just take it to Kiwanis Club here. This has been provided by the city regarding the upcoming,
Dead issue.
debt issuance.
Everybody's looking for a speaker.
Yeah, everybody's looking for a speaker.
Well, but if it's on our website too, it's so easy for us to refer people.
That's right. You can always say, check our website. There's
And
lots
because
of
there's
good
lots of
information
good
on our
information.
website about
Some
everything
of those
under
at
the
the
sun.
organizations are typically older demographic, and they're not gonna go to a website.
Well, you have that.
You know,
Well, but if you give them
I don't know, some of
that
them
and you take
serve
them to the
the-
club, I mean, if you just start
That-
flooding it
exactly.
everywhere, they're bound to hear it somewhere.
Okay, any other questions?
You've done every option you can.
Yeah,
You tried.
that you legally can.
Right.
Okay,